The idea, again, was regime change. That didn't work. And so now we have a carrier task group, strike group on its way to attack Iran. So an attack is imminent, I think. The goal here has never been negotiation. Whenever there has been negotiation, Israel has jumped up and down saying, don't negotiate. Of course, a nuclear agreement was reached with Iran a decade ago. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. It was actually ratified by the UN Security Council Resolution 2231 on the 20th of July, 2015. Then Trump ripped it up in his first term. So there's never been any desire by Israel to have a negotiated settlement. And since the United States does what Israel tells it to do, there has never been a readiness of the United States to have real negotiations with Iran. And Trump proved that again last summer, because we can recall that when Israel, with U.S. support, bombed Iran, which was on the 12th and 13th of June, 2025, that was 2 days before scheduled negotiations between the United States and Iran. So this whole idea that this is about Iran negotiating is phony. This is a regime change operation that's being carried out through hybrid warfare, meaning you try cyber warfare, you try street unrest, you try crushing the economy, and you try bombing, you try assassinations. They're trying in every which way to overthrow this government. And Trump, being Trump, blasts this out, that, well, if you don't do what we say, this is like Venezuela. What does it say? This fleet is ready, willing, and able to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary. You know, it's pure thuggery. People should understand, under the UN Charter, which Trump's deputy chief of staff called a nicety. It happens to be the international law, not for the gangsters in the White House, but for the rest of humanity. It says under Article 2, Section 4, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. So this is where we are right now, Glenn. I think, of course, we just went through this with Venezuela. Brazen, gross threats followed by an invasion, a kidnapping of the president and the first lady, and a claim by the United States that it runs Venezuela, including stealing oil off of tankers and sending that to the United States, with Donald Trump declaring that the money goes to him. So this kind of brazenness and lawlessness is part of our scene right now, but Iran is vastly more dangerous for the world, and still waiting for a European country to say boo about it, to say something, oh, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't have a war. Maybe we should obey the UN Charter. The question for Europe is, does it only speak up when the United States is about to attack Europe, or does Europe have any principles at all? And we're going to find out in the next few days.
You just heard Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, economist, Columbia professor, and one of the few voices in the American elite willing to speak truth, deliver a shocking but undeniable reality. Israel has spent 30 years trying to overthrow Iran, and the U.S. has been its weapon. And it's not stopping. Right now, a U.S. carrier strike group is moving toward Iranian waters. An attack is imminent. Not because of nuclear fears, not because of terrorism, but because Netanyahu wants regime change, and Trump is delivering. Let's unpack what Sachs said, and why this moment may mark the beginning of an illegal war that violates the UN Charter itself. Sachs starts with a fact most Western media ignores. Since 1996, Israel has pursued one goal: the overthrow of the Iranian government. It hasn't changed, it won't change. And every time diplomacy offers hope, Israel sabotages it. When did we see this happen? On June 12 to 13, 2025, at Iran was days away from scheduled negotiations with the U.S. Peace was possible. Then, Israel bombed Iran with full U.S. support. 2 days before talks. A deliberate act, not self-defense, not retaliation, but a premeditated strike to kill diplomacy. And Trump didn't condemn it, he cheered it, and then sent a carrier strike group, a floating threat, into position if to say, negotiate on our terms or face destruction. But that's not diplomacy, that's blackmail. Sachs reminds us, this isn't new. The U.S. already tried to crush Iran through economic warfare. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called it economic statecraft, a polite term for starving a nation into submission. Sanctions, banking blockades, oil embargoes, humanitarian aid restrictions, all designed to break the economy, spark unrest, trigger regime collapse. But it failed because Iranians didn't rise up. They stood firm to now. Washington and Tel Aviv have moved to Plan C: military escalation, cyber attacks, assassinations, street unrest, bombings. This is hybrid warfare, a slow-motion invasion without boots on the ground. And now, they're going kinetic with a carrier battle group capable of launching missiles, drones, and airstrikes parked near the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump? He doesn't hide his intent. This fleet is ready, willing, and able to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary. That's not deterrence, that's a death threat. Sachs drops the truth bomb. There's never been any desire for real negotiation. Not from Israel. Not from a U.S. Remember the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal? It was signed in 2015, ratified by UN Security Council Resolution 2231, legally binding, multilateral, successful. And then Trump ripped it up, not because Iran violated it, because Netanyahu wanted it dead. And since then, no serious effort to revive it. Why? Because the goal was never diplomacy. It was always regime change. And as long as the U.S. does whatever Israel says, there will be no peace, only war. Now here's the part most people ignore. Threatening military force against another country is illegal under international law. Sachs quotes the UN Charter, Article 2, for all members shall refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. That's not opinion, that's law. And Trump's own deputy chief of staff called the UN Charter nicety, implying it doesn't matter. But Sachs corrects him. It happens to be the foundation of international law, not for gangsters in the White House, but for the rest of humanity. And right now, the U.S. is threatening Iran openly, illegally, and aggressively. If this were Russia or China doing it, NATO would call it imperialism. But when the U.S. does it, silence. Even worse, complicity. Sachs ends with a challenge to Europe. We're waiting for a European country to say boo about this. Seriously, where's France, Germany, Britain? Do they only care about international law when the West is threatened? Or do they have principles at all? Because if the U.S. attacks Iran, the Strait of Hormuz could close, global oil prices could explode, the Middle East could ignite, and millions could die. And still, Europe says nothing. Again, just like over Ukraine, just like over Gaza, just like over Venezuela. But this time, the stakes are higher because Iran isn't weak. That IT has allies, that IT has missiles, that IT has Russian and Chinese backing. And unlike Venezuela, it can fight back. In conclusion, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real forces shaping the Iran crisis. Not nuclear fear, not terrorism, but a 30-year campaign of hybrid warfare, regime change, and blatant violations of international law, led by Israel, enabled by the U.S., and ignored by Europe. This is not diplomacy. This is thuggery. And unless someone stands up soon, we may wake up to headlines of war. War that was avoidable. War that is illegal. War that serves no interest except the ego of Netanyahu and the political survival of Trump. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
There's a lot of nostalgia, particularly in Great Britain, in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain. I can't really speak about, potentially somewhat in Germany, but certainly the Western European powers that have a history of imperialism and global power and influence are definitely nostalgic for the world that has long since passed. In the United States, there is no such nostalgia. And I would argue that in much of Europe, that nostalgia is giving way to reason and rationality. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're walking around the streets of Paris right now or London, you're seeing something that is far more damaging and far more dangerous to your country than anything that Russia could conceivably ever mount. And what am I talking about? Well, you're seeing your country fall into the hands of recent migrants who are unalterably opposed to your way of life, to your culture, to your religion. They, in turn, are attempting to set up some facsimile of the country from which they came, the society from which they emerged. This is immediate and it's dangerous. Now, the elites, and when I mean elites, I'm talking about the people largely with money, with the ability to insulate themselves from what happens inside their societies. We have them, you have them. They're not terribly concerned, and they view or they criticize their own populations for their lack of tolerance. Well, they're not being knifed in broad daylight. They're not being assaulted, brutalized, or raped. They're not dealing with this sort of in-your-face cultural assault that people in Great Britain and France and Germany are seeing every day. So I think the population doesn't have much tolerance left.